more than ever now, we are in the hyper-individualistic exacerbation of individualism in the West. And then it also goes to the narcissistic epidemics. We see everywhere those symptoms. This is very tiring. To live in that environment is like being thrown in, in the lion's den or something, for me. Well, there's a big difference between self-esteem and self-compassion. At first, I didn't know much about that, and I thought self-compassion is another way for the Western culture to get hold of compassion in an individualistic way, but I was completely wrong. And also in Buddhism, when we say, look deep within yourself, you don't wake up in the morning, may I suffer my whole day and my whole life. You would like, even you feel you are not gifted for happiness, that you have been abused and happiness not for you. But if there was the possibility, anyone will take it. So to recognize that, to nurture that, is also the first step to recognize that aspiration in any sentient being, however unskillful they are, to pursue happiness and get rid of suffering. Even those who are addicted to the cause of suffering, they do that because they think they will find happiness through that. So there's a big difference, and self-esteem, is an epidemic. I heard that when I read the narcissistic epidemics of Jean Twenge. She's one of the specialists on narcissism in the United States. That at some point she studied the dress of little girls, and 7 out of 10 has written princess somewhere. So, and then when you get last in the class, you get a prize for good participation, because otherwise the self-esteem will be put down. So it's the me generation, me. And me doesn't make anyone happy, neither yourself nor others. So that's a big problem. And also it is known that social media or anti-social media, whatever you call them, are windows for narcissism. Because when you have, say, 500 followers or much more, you don't have any real human relationship with them. And you're all looking is the likes and dislikes and all these things. And on the TVs are obsessed with how much auditors they get. And that's what the criteria is, not the quality of what they show. So that's part of the narcissistic epidemics, and I'm so sorry, but it's happening. And then I realized also that through the studies, that self-esteem, yes, leads to narcissism. It's an epidemic, but that self-compassion doesn't. You stop saying, I must be on the top, I must be the best, I must succeed in everything, or I'm totally bad and all that. And the whole world is, I'm doomed to suffering my whole life. So I was in the subway in France a few months ago. I just counted 8 out of 10, rich, poor, young, old, were on that listing. I think most of people who look on their phone, they are not looking at the suffering or happy thing. They just get, I'm afraid to say, distracted by trivial things. It seems to be what they do. So it's mostly distraction. They are not looking at the suffering in Somalia or Yemen or something. They're just looking at guys doing this thing. So one of the obstacles to actually pursuing altruism with resilience is empathic distress. The news, knowing what the world is doing, knowing the situation, is necessary again to act with discernment. So a minimum of being aware of what's going on, and also of the situation of suffering. For instance, there's been a lot of movies on the documentaries on the suffering of animals in slaughterhouse, like Earthlings. I did a book on a plea for the animals, and when I did a conference in Paris, I said, okay, I have shocking images and sequences from Earthlings and all that. So you want me to show or not? And some people say, I love too much animal, I can't stand it. So that's kind of the beginning of empathic distress. There's nothing wrong because person's oversensitive. But when I look at Earthlings the first time, and I was in touch later on with those who made the film, of course it's horrendous. But what I was thinking, taking notes, thinking, how can we use this information to do something? How can maybe I do something with the politician I know? So eventually we had a debate in the French Senate, about changing the civil code, because animals were considered as almost furnitures. It's called bien immobilier, like you own a house or a table. So keep on arguing, a sheep is not a table, moving table. It's a sentient being. I say it's a matter of basic rights. They are subject of life, whether a cat, a mouse, or a human being. No one wants to be stabbed in the stomach. So yes, when it comes to choose a university professor, a qualified person has more chance to be nominated than the goat. But when it comes to getting a knife in your stomach, basically we are the same. That's what we need to consider. They have a right not to suffer. And we don't say that the life of a flea is equivalent to life of a human being, but the life of a fly also doesn't matter, because it's a life, and all it tries to do is to stay alive and preserve its integrity, either physical or mental, when they're in the species that have consciousness. So that's the thing. It's a basic right to avoid being inflicted unnecessary suffering. So we managed to change the civil code that animals are sentient beings, and all European law and all that. So being confronted with this, if it can lead to action, is fine. If it's just to be overwhelmed and say it's impossible, the world is doomed and human beings are bad, the wicked world syndrome, then you will feel powerless. I mean, sometimes it's easy to be overwhelmed by the amount of unnecessary. When you think that before a war, it still could be avoided, and still people go into it. And then they spend decades of trying to find how to get out of it. I mean, it's like, how is that possible that people so-called intelligent get into these situations? And so much suffering that is totally unnecessary, could be avoided. It's just mind-boggling. Kristen Monroe, she's one of the great researchers on altruism. She wrote a book, I think, called The Heart of Altruism. She interviewed a lot of people who saved Jewish families or individuals during Second World War, the righteous one. And most of them, some of them were like from nobility, some of them were simple shopkeepers, and they put in danger their families, themselves. It was very highly risky. They certainly didn't feel the warm glow of having something good. Most of the time they didn't tell people for 20 years. But all they say is our brothers, human brothers and sisters, how can we leave them like that, being carried to and put to death in concentration camp? Could not do that. So that was the common thing. But then she tried to find out about philanthropists. So she interviewed a lot of people. And there's one occasion she met some very rich guy in Texas or something. And she tried to explain him. He says, I don't get it. What is there for me? So, in France, in a round table, in a meeting with a lot of, bosses of leading companies, I was sitting, it was about philanthropy, and I was sitting next to a CEO of a very big one, and he said, I love giving because I feel so good when I do that. So there is this thing, of, the so-called warm glow, but it's a terrible, flawed argument saying that you do that just because you feel good. Because those rescuers, certainly they didn't feel good. They were risking their life, their family's life. There's nothing to feel good except later, that when he succeeds. But on the spot, and the guy who jumped in icy water to save a kid, he doesn't say, I'm going to feel so good when this is over. This is ridiculous. And it's actually a tribute to human nature that you do feel good. And why not? If you will feel good after torturing someone, that's what we call a psychopath. So to feel good of doing good is just to be attuned with your basic goodness. And that's perfectly fine. And I talk a lot with Daniel Batson, who is the greatest researcher on altruism. He says, if the satisfaction of having doing something good comes as a secondary thing, that's not the thing you did it for, but it comes as a bonus, then it's fine. If it doesn't, you don't mind. If it comes, great. You get two for the price of one. It's like you grow a field of of rice or wheat, and you get the straw to put on your roof. You didn't do the whole thing to get the straw, but you get the straw as well. So nothing wrong with that if it's understood properly. So the primary aim should do to relieve suffering or bring good. And then maybe you will get also an immense satisfaction, which shows that it is attuned with your deepest nature. So that's fine. No problem with the warm glow. And if you don't get it, doesn't matter. I remember meeting Ricardo Semler. He was a Brazilian entrepreneur, and he could have made a fortune, like, I don't know, billion or one of those things. But he decided to give it as it came, to make schools in Brazil and so forth. So I met it at the TED Talk, and he said, in the US, there's this idea of giving back. And he said, well, if you have to give back, it's you took too much in the first place. So anyway, I think something new came out since the book on altruism came 10 years ago, is the movement of efficient altruism took more, became more developed. It's good to do good, but it's better to do it well. So with the resources, time, money, capacity that you have, what is the best you can do for others? You can't ask yourself to do things that beyond your means, but you can do something always. Now, if you want to do something, it's better to do it done properly. And that's precisely where philanthropy is a bit of a problem. You say they hate providence states. But providence states, at least, there's a coherent thinking about how to relieve people in extreme poverty, elders, handicapped people, free health care for the general good. Now, philanthropist, it's wonderful, but very often it's motivated by some emotional issues. You got a parent that got very sick on something or died, and you want to give for the research. You like nature, so you will give for natural parks, or you like dogs, so you will give to dog shelters. So all that is nice. But it turns out that only 10% of those philanthropists really care or follow up to see if their donation has been truly impactful. To investigate until you find out what is most useful is very important. Once I was in the US and someone said, oh, he's a great philanthropist, he just give $1 million. I said, oh, well, that's nice. For what? The promotion of gastronomy. Okay. What to do? I'm okay with dalbat.